Hi everyone, welcome back to Microsoft Windows Azure Fundamentals. As we move along the cloud services, we need to find out, is there any options available to store the structured or semi-structured data? Come, let's dive into the concepts. Now, let's look into the Windows Azure storage and overview about it. And do you think that why do we need to learn about Azure, and is Azure a globally recognized tool for using it? And what is the future of this Azure, and what is Azure secure? Azure storage is always scalable, mean to say that you can store up to 1 TB of data, and always secureable, mean to say that all the data is encrypted, and durable because the Microsoft always handles the data and fix the problem at the back end, and it is highly managed by the team, and it is accessible very frequently with a low cost. Azure Storage offers massively a scalable object store for the storing the data objects, for storing the files, for storing the reliable messages, as well as for storing the NoSQL data store. That is NoSQL, that is the table data stores into it. And now let's look into the Azure storage accounts. There are 4 types of account types. So here, one is the Azure Blob Storage, another one is the Azure File Storage, Azure Table Storage, and the last one is the Azure Queue Storage. And what is a blob storage? This is any sort of file that can be stored into it. The files can be your PNG file, it could be your PDF or a movie, or it could be a text file or any sort of files, and wherein you can store up to 1 TB of data into it. The second type of storage is the queues. The queues are nothing but it is a small chunk of messages or the data that is meant for storing this more scalable and also asynchronous in dealing with the applications and also with the application components. The third storage is the tables. This is a non-scalable and this is always meant to be, doesn't follow any strict schema into it. You can store the rows of tables, the rows of data into it, and the fast accessing is also possible in this. And the last one is a file storage, where the large amount of data can be stored into it, and that can be accessed by a protocol. We call that to be as an SMB protocol, server message block protocols. And before getting into these type of storages, let's get refreshed with the general type of data. It comes in 3 different forms. The one is the structured, the other one is the semi-structured, and the third one is the unstructured data. So once when you're dealing with the structured data, it is very simple, mean to say that the data is laid out so easily that it can be described with any sort of schema. And here you have the row of tables wherein the properties or the attribute or the characteristics can be stored into it, and every row is identified by its key for accessing, and more tables can be stored into it where you can also frame the relationship between the tables. Additionally, we see the next concept as a semi-structured data. Here, this is similar to that of the structure. You have a table format in storing the data, whereas each and every row has a unique key in accessing to the data. And this does not follow any strict schema in storing or accessing the data from these tables. And the last one is the unstructured data. Here we can use any sort of ping or a movie or a text file or an exe file or a PDF file that can be used for the storage and for accessing also. And now we'll move into the Azure Blob Storage. And Azure Blob Storage as that You can have the PNG file or a movie file or a text file or a PDF file. Collectively, we call this to be as a blob. And the synonym for this is the binary large object. And when the collection of blobs are put together into a bucket, we call that as a container. And one or more containers are put together, we call that as an Azure Blob Storages. And what are the key important characteristics of these blob storages? Or these storages are meant to be very easy for accessing and also quite easy for scalability is also possible over here. And this comes out in three important tiers. The one is the hot, cool, and the archive, and the last one is the delete tier. The hot tier is the one that you access to the data very frequently. The access is very faster and the cost of usage is also very less. The cool storage is the one that you access it not frequently to the data. So it is highly durable and low available to the users, wherein an enterprise can store the huge amount of the versions of its applications, or else any sort of log files or the backups can be stored, whereas you don't frequently access to this. The third type is that you never access to a data for a very long period of time. Say, for example, if you want to access those data, it takes hours together for accessing to it. We don't frequently access to those set of data. So this, if you want to use that type of storage, you can move to the archive one. The last one is the delete, wherein you can have the complete erasing of your data. That is where the free locations of your data can be used or reused in future for any type of storing purposes. And this is the format of your blob storage comes in. We take the diagram from right to left. You have the blobs wherein you can store your schemas. That is the schema.jpg file or a PNG file or a PDF file, all are stored inside a container, and that container will be available to the user accounts. And these are the nomenclatures that you need to declare once when you start storing your or creating your blob storages. And next we look into the Azure Queue Storage. The Azure Queue Storage is the one, say for example, when a user has 1, 2, 3, or 4 number of jobs he needs to get completed, and all the jobs are being queued out in the format of the messages, and all the messages are being further processed by the external services or any sort of application, and that is being taken out into a small chunk of data. We call that as the messages. And this is the format of the sequence of the queue goes by. You have the messages, and that is all being grouped together to one queue, and that is being stored into the particular user accounts.